One weekend in Formula One changed everything forever. A race where danger was already in the air before it even began. And a legend who never returned from his final lap. A weekend that started with fear. The 1994 San Marino Grand Prix weekend did not start with excitement. It started with unease. From the very first practice sessions at Imola, something felt wrong. On Friday, Rubens Barrichello suffered a terrifying crash during practice. His car hit a curb, launched into the air, and slammed violently into the barriers. He survived, but the impact of the accident immediately raised concerns across the paddock. The warning signs were already there, but things were about to get worse. On Saturday, during qualifying, Roland Ratzenberger lost his life after a high-speed crash. It was a moment that completely shook the Formula One world. Within just 24 hours, the atmosphere inside the paddock changed completely. Drivers were no longer just thinking about performance. They were thinking about survival. And one of them, Ayrton Senna, was visibly affected by everything that had happened. Because by then, it was clear this was no longer just another race weekend. The legend under pressure, Ayrton Senna, arrived at Williams in 1994 as a three-time world champion. For many, it looked like a perfect combination, one of the greatest drivers in Formula One, joining one of the fastest cars on the grid. But reality was very different. The Williams FW16 was not the dominant machine people expected. It was difficult to control, unstable in certain conditions, and still being adapted to the new regulation changes introduced that season. Senna himself had already expressed concerns about the car's behavior during testing and early races. Despite his experience and skill, he was struggling to fully trust the machine underneath him. And in Formula One, trust between a driver and the car is everything. As the 1994 season began, pressure was already building not just from competition, but from within the team itself. Senna had moved to Williams to fight for another championship. But after the opening races, it was clear that nothing about this season would be easy. The final race begins. Sunday at Imola arrived with a strange silence in the air. The events of the previous days were still heavy on everyone's mind, but the race still had to go on. When the lights went out, Ayrton Senna did what he did best. He got a strong start. From pole position, he immediately took control of the race. Lap after lap, he stayed in the lead, setting a steady rhythm at the front of the field. For a brief moment, it looked like normal racing had returned. Senna was leading, the pace was under control, everything seemed stable on the surface, but inside the cockpit, every driver knew the truth. This was not a normal Sunday, and at Imola, nothing ever stays calm for long. Lap 7, everything changes. Lap 7, Senna was still in the lead. As he came into the Tamburello corner, the car didn't turn. It went straight on, leaving the racing line. The Williams left the track and hit the concrete wall at high speed. There was a heavy impact. Almost immediately, the race was stopped. Red flags came out as medical teams rushed in. In a few seconds, everything changed. The silence of Imola. After the impact, everything just stopped. The race was immediately stopped with a red flag as medical teams rushed to the scene. Marshals and doctors reached Senna's car and began emergency treatment at the circuit. A medical helicopter was prepared and Senna was airlifted to the hospital in Bologna. For a long time, there was no clear public information about his condition. Inside the paddock, drivers and teams waited, not knowing what had happened. Hours later, the confirmation came. Ayrton Senna had died from his injuries. Within hours, the entire Formula One paddock knew what had started as a race weekend had now become one of the darkest moments in the history of the sport. What went wrong after the race? Attention slowly moved away from the track and into investigation. What actually caused the car to go straight at Tamburello became the biggest question in Formula One. Multiple technical examinations were carried out on the Williams FW16. Over time, investigators focused on the steering column area of the car. According to the findings presented in Italian court proceedings, a failure in the steering column assembly was identified as a key factor linked to the crash. The case went through years of legal and technical review as experts tried to understand exactly how and why the failure happened. There was no simple answer, but what became clear was that the incident was not just about one moment on track. It raised serious questions about engineering, design, and safety standards in Formula One at the time. And those questions would go on to shape the future of the sport. A sport changed forever. After Imola, Formula One could not continue the same way. The events of that weekend forced the sport to take a hard look at itself. In the months that followed, major safety reforms were introduced across Formula One. Car designs were reviewed, crash structures were improved, and new regulations were brought in to reduce the risk of similar incidents in the future. Circuits were also changed. High-speed corners were modified or redesigned to improve safety. The Grand Prix Drivers Association, which had been inactive for years, was also revived as drivers pushed for a stronger voice in safety decisions. It was clear that the sport had entered a new era, one that was shaped directly by what happened at Imola in 1994. Legacy of Ayrton Senna. Ayrton Senna's name never left Formula One. Over time, he became more than just a driver. He became a symbol of passion, precision, and relentless determination. Modern Formula One today is far safer than it was in 1994, and many of those improvements trace back to the lessons learned after that weekend. Every driver who lines up on the grid today races in a sport shaped by that era, and Senna's legacy continues every time the lights go out. Not just in records or statistics, but in the safety of every lap driven since.